There's no better activity for experiencing a wide range of emotions than driving. The thrill and excitement of the open road, the joy that comes with the freedom, the anger and frustration at bad drivers, roadworks and gas prices, the fear when a driver cuts you up or stops sharp in front of you. So, what better place to do a video talking about emotions? Now in this video I'm going to break down emotions to their core, and it's not about hormones and chemicals, they're the effect rather than the cause. I'm going to talk about how anger and fear can actually be good things and how happiness can be bad. I'm going to talk about goals, achievements, words and thoughts. And I'm going to turn everything that you thought you knew on its head. All those well-meaning ideas that coaches, motivational speakers and positive thinkers push out be overturned, leaving you with an idea of how to really achieve that perfect state of being. Now the roots of this video start back when I was at school. We had this traditional head teacher, an imposing man who always wore the black gown, the mortarboard and carried his willow cane. He swept up and down the halls like a raven seeking food, but he was an amazing storyteller. One of the many stories that stuck in my mind was the story of the blind men and the elephant. And it goes something like this. A group of blind men heard that a strange animal called an elephant had been brought to the town. But none of them were aware of its shape and its form. So, out of curiosity, they said, we must inspect and know it by touch, of which we are capable. So they sought it out, and when they found it, they groped about it. The first person whose hand landed on the trunk said, this being is like a thick snake. For another one whose hand reached its ear, it seemed like a kind of fan. As for another person whose hand was upon its leg, said, the elephant is like a pillar, like a tree trunk. The blind man who placed his hand upon the side said, the elephant is a wall. And another who felt its tail described it as a rope. And the last felt its tusk, stating the elephant is that which is hard, smooth, and like a spear. Now each had his own idea of what the elephant looked like, and they were all right, but also wrong, because they only had grasped a small fragment of the full picture. And this is how I see it dealing with emotions and the mind. People come up with their own ideas of how we should deal with them, but they're barely tickling the surface of a deep and complicated process. Look at all the advice out there, from Bobby McFerrin with his don't worry, be happy, to the pessimistic approach of expect the worst and you'll never be disappointed. We have expressions from speaking circuits about big dreams and goals, about pushing away negative emotions and about positive thinking and affirmations. We've got religions and ideologies that preach love, forgiveness and turning the other cheek. Now personally, my favourite bit of the Bible was where Jesus lost his shit in the temple when they were gambling and started throwing tables around. So let's take a phrase I just used there, negative emotions. That's straight away a big red flag. There's no such thing. Anger, hate and fear are as important as happiness, love and joy. Maybe more so. But we've been indoctrinated to shun these emotions. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so there's some other elements we need to explain first. The first thing I need to cover is the principles of consciousness. Now, if you've watched my free webinar or done the Sanomentology training, then this will be familiar to you, but I'll cover it here very briefly. Most ideas of consciousness depict a dualistic mind made up of the conscious and the subconscious. But this is an idea that's stagnated since the Dark Ages. Science has moved on, and the psychology of the mind needs to catch up. Newer ideas of consciousness emerge from the combination of two modern scientific principles of thought. Firstly, we've got string theory, which suggests that the universe is not made up of point particles that like has always been presumed, but rather tiny vibrating strings. Now these strings give rise to the idea of a multi-dimensional universe. And then we've got the resonance theory of consciousness, which says that consciousness is produced by the synchronization of vibrations across these strings. Now, this suggests that consciousness is a multi-dimensional entity that in principle could have been the foundation of creation itself. With this in mind, we can break down consciousness into 3 sections, each with 2 elemental parts, and between each is a level of communication, giving 11 separate elements of consciousness. So, dealing with just 2 of them seems a futile effort. No wonder mental health is suffering so much. Now let's look at these levels briefly. Now the first section of consciousness is what I call the abstract consciousness. It spans the first and second dimensions, and within this level are the first 2 fundamental elements of consciousness. At the first dimension, we've got the one-dimensional element of the word. Now this is not a spoken word, it's rather than a verbal expression, it's a statement of purest intent. And being one-dimensional, it's clear and concise. At the second dimension, we then have thought. This starts to add to the word, giving it meaning and purpose. It's the 2-dimensional element, and it's more flexible in nature, allowing adaptability and change. The next section is the existential consciousness, and this is the purest of them all, purely because it's the level that our brains are trained to understand. However, there's nothing simple about it. It's comprised of the next 2 elements of consciousness. Firstly, we have the 3-dimensional element of the physical. This is the realm of existence, everything we can touch, see, hear, or detect in any way at all. It's reality as we perceive it, and this is the stomping ground of academic science, but also its limitation. It's our physical home. Then we have the 4-dimensional element of consciousness. This is the realm of our thoughts and our feelings. The unconscious element is bound to the physical element by the confines of the existential consciousness. However, as a 4th-dimensional element, it can travel across time and space. Now, the unconscious runs entirely on programs that are created over time with the sole purpose of survival of the physical form. It's the protector of the part of you that exists in this time and space. The word and thought can survive, it's outside of time and space. The higher levels are eternal, they'll continue. But the physical form is a fleeting and brief existence relative to the rest. An existence riddled with danger whilst having opportunities to experience great adventures. It needs all the protection and guidance it can get, and the unconscious is your ethereal bodyguard. Then we have the final section, the noumenal consciousness. This is the consciousness that exists across all planes and realms. It's the part responsible for guiding us, leading us, creating us and our reality, where all thoughts and ideas are accessed. It's made up of 2 separate elements. The first is what I call alpha, and it resides in the 5th dimension. It is you as an individual in your purest form, you without your programming, your character, your ethos, your spirit. And it has access to every possible version of you, every possibility and probability. And alpha has a direct connection to the alpha of every other individual's consciousness too. And finally, we have omega, the topmost level of individual consciousness. It resides in the 6th dimension, and this is where everything merges as one, commonly referred to as the collective consciousness. It's the uppermost level of the entirety of consciousness. Now, the noumenal consciousness resides outside of the physical form as a post-materialistic mind. So there we have the 6 levels of consciousness. Next, we have the communication between them. The word will communicate with thought using logic and power for energy to be added to the process. Thought will then use reason to communicate with the physical and to create our reality. The physical will communicate with the unconscious through the conscious mind. The unconscious will then use will to communicate with alpha, and finally, alpha uses pure energy to communicate with the omega. Now, like I said, this is covered much more detail in Sanomentology training. Another element to acknowledge is the concept of entropy. The physical universe at the 3rd dimension is bound by the laws of physics. Due to the 2nd law of thermodynamics and distribution of energy, everything breaks down into chaos. It has an opposite called negentropy, and it's defined as the temporary coming together of order within a system. The solar system, the universe, life itself is formed by negentropy. And since negentropy is an unnatural process that breaks the laws of physics, it had to be formed by an external force, potentially outside of the third dimension of physical reality. Now, this force can be regarded as the divine, as God, as an energy field. Humanity's given it many names and personifications over the millennia, but ultimately it is consciousness. It's the same force that created the universe that fuels us to evolve, to grow, and to create order in the world around us. It's the fundamental force that fuels our creativity and drives us to seek patterns and order in our lives. Now, everything in this dimension is locked into a permanent battle between order and chaos, a battle that is mirrored from the smallest scale of subatomic particles to the entire universe itself. Consciousness is quite literally the only thing keeping it all together. It deserves much more understanding and credit than what's generally given to it. So with that awareness of the levels of consciousness and its part in the stability and function of our world, we can now dive into that intriguing world of emotion. Science acts very much like the blind man feeling the elephant. It tries to form a picture based on the limitations of its three-dimensional perception. It talks about hormones and chemicals, since they're detectable during emotional changes. However, this doesn't explain the majority of emotional turmoil that we can experience. Why would our chemicals and hormones change with no outside factors to make us experience sadness for no reason, or love, or anger, or any other emotion? But when we look at the bigger, multi-dimensional picture of consciousness and its battle to fight the natural order of entropy, we can put together an alternative theory of emotions where the production of the hormones and the chemicals are the result rather than the cause. They're purely an effect, a mechanism fueled by emotions to help us deal with the cause. This can get complicated very quickly. I'm going to explain the process from the simplest aspect for the sake of this video, but in my work and my training, I'll be delving much deeper. I'll be making some theological, scientific and philosophical observations too. And it'll give you an idea of how they all come together when you look beyond the walls of the individual disciplines. As we've already established, consciousness forms from the synchronization of the vibrations of tiny strings. When we refer to the vibration here, it's not the standard vibration as we normally perceive it, measured in hertz. These vibrations are what are classed as non-Hertzian, and they can propagate outside of time. The harmonization or synchronization of these vibrations doesn't mean that they are the same. Think about musical notes. Two or more notes of different frequencies can be played together and they will harmonize to create a chord. But not all notes harmonize, and likewise with consciousness, different levels can have different frequencies but still form consciousness. The more complex the chord, the more levels involved, the more powerful the consciousness presents itself, and the bigger the range of emotions. So, bacteria, for example, with a limited range of consciousness and limited access to the multiple levels, is mostly devoid of emotion and creativity. In the same way, technology such as AI is only harmonized across a range purely within the lowest levels of consciousness, so again will always be limited in its capabilities. The more complex the life form, the higher the range of dimensional reach, the higher the range of emotion. So dogs, cats, horses, cows, and many other animals that we're familiar with are vastly more emotional than lower forms. Now, science talks about the size of the brain being responsible for this, but then it can't just be about size. An elephant's brain is much larger than a human's. It has many more neurons, and it's just as complex. Now, the elephant experiences many of the same emotions as humans, but it lacks the creativity and the potential of humans. The brain may be the powerhouse of consciousness in a limited three-dimensional concept, but it's much more like an internet router when we look at the larger scope. And it's not the only part that is the key. It's the brain connects to the lower elements of consciousness, word, logic and thought and reason. But the higher parts from will upwards is connected via the solar plexus, a region in the center of our bodies with a similar structure of nerves. And this is where we can begin to look at the emotions at their root. Will and reason, the communication between the lower dimensions and the higher dimensions of consciousness, have their own frequency. The frequency of reason is produced by the combination of the frequency of the abstract and the existential. And the frequency of will comes from the combination of the existential and the noumenal consciousness. Now, this frequency is ever changing based on many complicated factors of things happening at the different levels of consciousness, from the power, the importance, the attention given, and much, much more. We're going to talk about that more later on. So we have reason and will. Reason referred to as the head and will referred to as the heart or the gut feeling. The difference in their frequency is what gives rise to emotion. The closer the frequency, the more positive the emotion. Now, in a utopian state, the frequency across all levels of consciousness would be equal and all life would exist in a state of bliss. This is possibly the roots of the stories of paradise that are mirrored across most religions and mythology. We've got the Garden of Eden from Abrahamic religions. Dilmun is Sumerian mythology. The Garden of Hesperides in Greek, the Heavenly Peach Garden in Chinese, Asgard, Vaikuntha, Jhana, and many more. They're all primordial paradises that could be explained by the initial concept of a harmonious existence, a time before entropy could begin to disrupt the order and the harmony. Now, we've already established the makeup of consciousness. In its essence, it is pure energy spread across multiple dimensions. And as string theory suggests, all things, matter and energy, are made up of wiggling strands of energy that look like strings. This includes you as a physical being and a conscious self. So like I said, this is going to get complicated real quick. So let's simplify it by just dealing with one level of consciousness to start, the existential. And we'll replace the strings with springs. Just one change of letter, simple. That way we can get a fundamental grasp on the energies and the processes at play. Reason and will are the opposing factors, with will connecting the existential consciousness with the higher level of the noumenal consciousness, and reason connecting it to the lower abstract consciousness. So now imagine a series of springs connecting reason and will across the existential consciousness, making up our physical and our mental being. The tension on these springs is what creates emotions, and this tension is created by the differences in vibration between will and reason. Let's turn this idea into a simple model. For this, we'll use a single element, so we've just got one spring in play. In this model, we have two sliding scales, one for reason, one for will. Between them lies the existential consciousness. Now, the scale represents a level of vibration, and spontaneous self-organization will try to bring the vibration of will and reason into sync. Other factors, belief, experience, the lower and upper elements of consciousness, and the conscious effects of other people will pull them out of sync. And there's also the dampening effect of the conscious mind that will affect the speed of change of vibration. And we'll talk about that later as well. Now, in this first example, your will and reason are both neutral. They're vibrating at a neutral point, just doing their thing without a thought or a care in the universe. Now, this is a situation that's virtually impossible to have, as the will or reason will generally have some sort of opinion about things. Since the will is connected to a much bigger picture, it will never be in a neutral position. And as humans, we form our own beliefs and opinions about just about anything. Just go on Facebook and look at a conversation about what the end of a loaf of bread is called. So, if this state could be reached by silencing the will and reason completely, it would be the perfect springboard for growth, as the potential energy is stored in the spring with nowhere to go. Even though it has no opinion either way on any subject, it is a form of internal love resulting in a sublime inner peace. So let's make a statement now. And we'll start with a factual statement rather than a subjective opinion. Opinions work in the same way, however, it becomes more complicated as there's going to be multiple springs at play. I'm trying to keep this simple as possible for now. So I'm making a statement, the Earth is round. So in this next example, your will is aware that the Earth is round, but your reason has no opinion. It has no facts for or against, and therefore is neutral. So here we have zero potential energy stored and zero kinetic energy. So you don't get drawn into arguments. You feel no emotion at all about the statement. There's no desire to change this. You're okay with that way of thinking. But in this next example, your will and your reason both agree that the Earth is round. Your will knows that from its link to the higher levels of consciousness, and your reason knows by evidence that supports the fact. In this instant, the spring is again compressed, storing potential energy, but this time the energy will be used to grow that idea. Your will and your reason, in agreement to the statement, will set out to reaffirm the statement in a calm and collected way with analysis of data that will be carried out with a bias supporting the statement. In this situation, again, there is only love. There's no need to argue or attack other people's opinions. Complications can arise with this scenario when you start to question the intelligence or other factors of the opposing statements, because then we've got other springs that come into play that will result in other emotions arising. So when you argue with somebody over something that you have complete conviction over, the reason for the anger is usually some other factor, not the subject at hand. So next it gets interesting. Let's say you are a flat earther. You're in a whole messed up situation now because your reason says the Earth is flat, and you've got all the evidence to back that up from your flat earther groups to support that, but your will knows it's round. So you have a massive separation between will and reason. The spring gets stretched to its full length, resulting in a huge amount of potential energy being drawn inwards. And in this case, because reason is in disagreement with the statement, it's a brain-driven response. The anger that is generated will tend towards verbal disagreement, shouting and arguing, as is evident on many social media platforms. Sustained focus on this will result in the person getting headaches, migraines, confusion, and other issues surrounding the brain and the head. The potential energy in the anger drives for change, but because the Earth is not going to go against the whole cosmos for a few people, it is reason that has to adjust towards will to take the tension off the spring. Unfortunately, for most flat earthers, they will not be swayed in their opinions, so the anger leaks out in chaotic ways such as temper tantrums, irrational outbursts, or similar, or it turns inwards to create emotional and physical issues. Now, a simple twist of this, the direction of this anger can be easily altered by a simple reframe of the statement. If we change the statement to the Earth is flat, suddenly they're moving their focus where will disagrees and reason agrees. This shifts the focus of the adrenaline to the solar plexus area, where it is then felt throughout the body. This will result in adrenaline and other hormones being released, giving a buzz. And this is one of the reasons why these people tend to flock together in groups to support their claims, because it's like a drug. In this case, the sustained energy will cause outbursts of physical disagreement and violence, and if it's not dissipated, will result in physical ailments of the body. Conditions like anxiety, IBS, sexual performance issues, and other problems with the functioning of the body may arise. Now, apologies to any watchers who are flat earthers, but my will and reason will both question you here. My reason may say that you sound intelligent, but my will be in disagreement. And in line with this theory, the focus of the energy will be on my solar plexus, resulting in emotional responses rather than verbal. So, in summary, the level of emotion is dictated by the tension on the spring. A compressed spring results in growth and positive emotions such as love and joy as the forces push outwards. A stretched spring will result in negative emotions such as anger and fear, leading to either change or to physical or mental turmoil. The focus of the energy and how it's harnessed will determine where the energy is used and the outcome of it. Now, the tension on the spring will determine the scope of the emotion experienced. With a fully compressed spring, pure love will flow, whereas with a fully stretched spring, you will experience pure rage or anger. But rarely do these extremes get met without interference from other factors, and usually the emotions fall somewhere between. Physiological changes and the critical mind will dampen emotional extremes, as well as interference from other sources of energy, which again I'll talk about later. So what are the range of emotions and what power do they hold? Firstly, let's look at the scale from the proved example. On the scale we have the range from -10 to +10 across both the reason and will. These are representative to the agreement or disagreement to the statement made, so the values for reason and will change depending on the way the statement or thought is presented. However, the value of the emotion is based on the negative of the difference between the two plus 10. So if reason and will have the same value, then the energy value, EV, marked as X on the graph, will be plus 10. And this is pure love and it encourages growth. If reason is at 0 and will is at plus 10, then the energy values will be 0. And this results in no energy being used or stored in any way. If reason is at -10 and will is at plus 10, then the energy value will be -10. And this is pure rage or anger, and the energy can be used for change if it's used properly. So the formula would be energy value, EV, equals the negative of the difference between R and W plus 10. On this scale, values of energy value, on this scale, the values of EV between -3 and +3 will not have any major outer power, but they will contribute to inner processes. Values lower than -3 will instigate change if it's used correctly, and values higher than +3 will instigate growth. A small note here, a value of +10, pure love, is not necessarily good. The love is internal to the experiencer, so if that value is tied to a negative process, for example, a negative value for reason and will, then it will cause that process to grow. This can lead to obsession, persecution, terrorism, even war, are just a few examples of pure love having a negative consequence. So let's look at the emotions and give them all a rough score. The full list of emotions is extensive, but here are some of the most commonly recognized ones alongside their range of values. So we've got happiness at scale of +10 to +9. We've got fear at -10 to -1. Shock at -6 to +6. Joy +1 to +9. Anxiety -5 to -1. Amazement +1 to +8. Contentment +1 to +5. Terror -10 to -5. Wonder +3 to +8. Amusement +1 to +3. Anger would be -10 to -5. Disgust -8 to -1. Sadness -3 to +3. Rage -10 to -8. Contempt would be -4 to -1. Grief -5 to -1. Frustration -5 to -1. Dislike -3 to -1. Sorrow -5 to -1. Irritation -5 to -1. Pride +1 to +5. Disappointment -3 to +3. Surprise goes from -8 to +8. Satisfaction from -3 to +3. Triumph +1 to +8. Self-respect +1 to +6. Shame -6 to -1. Humiliation -9 to -1. Embarrassment -4 to -1. Guilt -7 to -1. Excitement can go all the way from -9 to +9. Anticipation -5 to +5. Confidence +1 to +7. Faith -6 to +6. Hope +1 to +6. curiosity -7 to +7, love +5 to +10, infatuation can go from -8 to +8, compassion -5 to +5, jealousy -8 to -1, empathy can go all the way from -10 to +10, boredom -1 to +1, indifference -2 to +2, apathy -1 to +1, gratitude +1 to +9, despair -8 to -1, desire -8 to +8, optimism +1 to +5, desperation -9 to -4, hopelessness -5 to -1, regret -1 to -8. There's a lot to go through there. This list is not exhaustive, but it covers a wide range of emotions that people commonly experience. However, they are complex, often arising as a result of a blend of basic emotions. The basic emotions are universal across the globe in humans and many other animals. They're the ones primarily created by the tension in the springs, whereas the critical thinking, the conscious mind and the unconscious mind will define the deeper emotion experienced based on belief, experience and other factors. Now, these basic emotions, as identified by psychologist Paul Ekman, include happiness, sadness, disgust, fear, surprise and anger. These emotions are considered basic because they're universally experienced across human cultures and they're reflected in facial expressions. Now, love, on the other hand, is not typically listed as a basic emotion because it's much more complex and it's multifaceted. It involves a mix of various emotions and feelings, forming a deep emotional bond rather than a single identical facial expression. Love is often seen as a powerful force that encompasses a range of emotions, making it unique in its own right. However, I disagree and I think love should be included, and I've made it part of this theory. So, from one end of the scale to the other, we would have anger, fear, disgust, sadness, surprise, happiness, love. Now, the positions of these are not absolute, with surprise being one of the most obvious as changing positions depending on circumstances. So the previous section gave us a very simple example of the mechanics at play in the generation of emotions. But in reality, there are many springs affecting each thought process. So how do they all come together? We're going to cover that in the next section, but before we do, I need to address a key element, one that is mostly controlled by both the conscious and the unconscious parts of the mind. And that element is the importance we place on elements of our lives and the thoughts we have, both consciously and unconsciously. The value we assign to various aspects of our lives plays a critical role in the shaping of our emotional responses and our experiences. This connection between valuation and emotion is both nuanced and profound, highlighting how our priorities influence our feelings in a range of situations. Take, for example, the act of walking on a ledge. When we encounter a narrow surface close to the ground, we often feel very little trepidation about the experience, walking along a curb, for example. The minimal risk involved means that our emotional response is subdued. Our perception of safety allows us to traverse the ledge with ease. However, when faced with a high elevation, the stakes significantly change. The inherent danger associated with falling amplifies our emotional state, evoking feelings of fear and anxiety. And this heightened emotional intensity reflects our intrinsic value for safety and self-preservation, elevating our worry and our caution to match the perceived threat. The scenario underscores an important psychological principle. Our emotional engagement is not merely a response to the objective circumstances we face, but rather a reflection of how we value those circumstances. On the other side of the emotional spectrum, the anticipation and eventual realization of success can lead to intense positive emotional responses. Achieving recognition in the workplace, for example, serves as a powerful reminder of our professional identity and our aspirations. When we deeply value our career achievements, receiving acknowledgement from peers or superiors can evoke a range of emotions from joy, pride, and fulfillment. And this surge in positive feelings stems from our affirmation that our hard work and our dedication have not gone unnoticed, and it validates our efforts. The recognition not only reinforces our sense of self-worth, but also enhances our motivation to chase further goals, and it creates a feedback loop where positive valuation leads to increased emotional investment in future endeavours. Moreover, the emotional stakes associated with personal relationships are similarly significant. Reuniting with a loved one after a long separation can elicit intense feelings of joy and relief, revealing just how crucial these connections are to our emotional well-being. The anticipation of such reunions can heighten our emotional states, filling our daily lives with excitement and longing as we count down the days. And then, when the moment of reunion arrives, the outpouring of happiness is often overwhelming. The term joy feels inadequate to describe the depth of these feelings. This response is fundamentally tied to the high value we place on these relationships. They're not just social connections, but vital components of our emotional fabric, integral to our sense of belonging and fulfillment. In essence, the importance we attribute to different facets of our lives acts as a magnifying glass for our emotions. It intensifies them proportionally to the value and the significance we associate with those experiences. Whether we're navigating the precariousness of a high ledge or celebrating a long-awaited professional achievement, our emotions serve as a barometer of what we truly value. This interplay shapes our emotional landscape. It paints our world with a rich spectrum of feelings that reflect our priorities, our aspirations, and our connections in life. Understanding this dynamic not only enhances our self-awareness, but it also allows us to navigate emotional responses more effectively, fostering resilience and mindfulness in the face of life's challenges. So in the previous example, I gave a simple statement to show the way the tension on the spring creates the emotional state. Now let's look at another example where multiple elements come into play. We're going to use the statement, the world is a nice place. Now, this might generate a whole range of thoughts in you straight away. And that's the point. Now, research shows that we can only focus on one thing at a time. Sorry to all you multitaskers out there. And that we can only hold 4 separate thoughts at any one time. But in the unconscious mind, there are thousands of connections being made. So one thing with 4 conscious thoughts and lots of background thoughts will elicit an emotional response quickly. So how does that work? The world is a nice place. We all have our own unique perspective on this statement, and rather than share mine, let's use an imaginary scenario. The mind will jump to key elements of this statement that are important to you. If you live in a situation of poverty or lack, then that will be one factor. If you travel often and enjoy nature, it's another. If you watch the news and see the issues of human conflict and the struggles, that's going to be another effect. If you're a follower of affairs such as climate change or routinely experience pleasure or pain in your place in the world, this will impact the overall view. And your current state of mind will be another element to add to this, if you're an optimist or a pessimist. So, these factors will influence your view based on the level of importance you place on each element. And we can see this in evidence in this diagram. So each one of these elements would have its own spring. First, we got the statement of nature is wonderful. Then we've got people are bad. The world is dying. Ideas of war and poverty. Ideas that don't survive. underlying factors from the unconscious mind. Now, working out the values of each of these elements and using the importance levels, we can get an overall energy value of plus 3.4. And this is just in the growth zone. So your overall emotional state in this instance is causing the Earth to remain a great place with just a little growth for the better. And this is when you're thinking about it. Now, if we look at this at any given time, then the unconscious factors are the only ones that count. And these are many, with a overall score given here as plus 9. You're overall optimistic about the world being great, and you're growing the situation as you see it. That sounds good, yeah? Ironically, it isn't. Because you're growing the world as it is, with all its good, but also all of its war, its poverty, and its greed. So it gets worse. This is where standard ideas of manifestation miss the point and contribute to the problem. And we cover that more in the programs that are upcoming. Are you following me so far? Slightly? Good? Okay, let's complicate it even further. So far, we have focused on just the existential consciousness, but we have the other two parts, and they have a huge impact on the position of reason and will in relation to each other. We also have the elements in between to consider, which act as dampeners, almost like a viscous liquid, limiting sudden and rapid irrational changes. Without this, the results would be catastrophic. Now, the previous diagrams could be expanded to show the other levels as shown here. The changes to omega are slow and slight. Omega is connected to everything that can ever be, therefore nothing really changes in its perspective. So we can look at that as almost a fixed point. Each level below has more freedom to move. Now, will is connected to omega, so its changes are limited by the higher dimensions with noumenal consciousness, keeping it fairly stable. It will move in relation to the connections with others at a deep level and the individual connection to the higher states. So religion, spirituality, mediation, meditation, and other practices will have influence on the level of will. Reason, on the other hand, is much more free-flowing. It's affected by the belief of the individual, by their experiences, their words and their thoughts, and the words and thoughts of others. So it can move rapidly as needed. And this is why it's easier to break a man's mind than his spirit. The word right at the bottom, it's a bit of a loose cannon. It's kept in check slightly by logic and reason connected via thoughts, but it does have the ability to fly around like a plastic bag in a hurricane. Now, this whole connection from the highest levels to the lowest causes a problem that's similar to the free body problem in physics. Here we have a kind of triple pendulum with a fixed point and three weighted elements connected. When you have a double pendulum, slight changes to the middle weight can cause unpredictable and exaggerated movements to the lower one. But here we've got another one connected, so those slight changes at all levels will greatly affect the lowest one, word. Now, the dampening effect from the critical mind will usually keep the three springs in some sort of alignment, preventing any one of them going too crazy. But sometimes it does. We might lose faith. We have violent physical outbursts. We have terrible thoughts that may burst out verbally, saying something we regret. And of course, there is always that involuntary outburst of fuck, usually at the most inappropriate times. Now, these moments happen when something shifts too fast and the dampening can't quite cope. It's like hitting a pothole in a car on the suspension, hitting the underside of the car. But sometimes we can lose that dampening effect completely. The suspension snaps completely and drives a hole through the car. And that can happen at any level. And the higher up the level, the more dangerous and extreme. If we lose that dampening effect at the level of will, it can go one of two ways. The individual will either become broken inside completely and may attempt suicide, or they'll project it outward, resulting in atrocities against others like violent crimes, murder, genocide, and other acts of extreme violence will ensue. If we lose it at the level of reason, then we can become psychotic. Our mind snaps and we have no ability to assess our thoughts or our actions related to those thoughts. We can have intrusive thoughts, be quick to lose our temper in a violent way, both physically and verbally. Obsession, paranoia, conspiracy, delusions, and other mental and physical elements will arise. And if we lose it at the lowest level of word, it's just our outbursts that will be affected. We'll lose all social filters, say exactly what comes up, and in extreme cases, for example with Tourette's, we'll lead with completely irrelevant but inappropriate outbursts. Now, this dampening effect is not active in children. It doesn't come into play until the age of between 7 and 11, which is why children could be so entertained by the silliest games, but also quick to throw a tantrum or to get upset. This helps with learning, but it also makes the child susceptible to the bad stuff around them. The loss of the dampening effect for an adult may be caused by many factors. Trauma, especially in childhood, before that critical thinking comes into play. Extreme situations of any kind, good and bad. Illness and disease. Abuse, especially continued and persistent. Brainwashing, for example, by cults. These are just a few of the factors. Now, one other major factor to consider in this idea of the vibration of the different elements in relation to emotions is the effect of others. Now, again, we're not going to cover this in this video, but a simple example will show the basics of the connections between two people, which, when we expand it to groups of people like societies, it begins to look very much like the structure of an atom, or atoms as they come together, as below, so above. Now, I've expressed here how the emotions come about. What we do with them is extremely important, and also the role that entropy has on them. Let's start with the negative emotions. These are extremely important emotions, and the whole trend of denying them is a dangerous game. Negative emotions are created when there's a large difference in frequency. They are there to help you to restore that harmony. The key is to direct the energy into resolving the situation. So denying the emotions, burying them, or letting the energy out in random ways will cause damage to yourself and the reality that you're experiencing. Real change always comes from some form of negative emotional state, be it anger, frustration, or despair. So embrace that anger, that fear, that pain. Let it fuel your change. But what about love and happiness? Surely that can't be bad. Yes, it can. Firstly, it creates that harmony that entropy cannot let exist. It's not natural. If everything is in harmony, then with no direction, we'll stagnate. We cease to live our lives fully. But luckily for us, this pure state is rarely reached. There'll always be something to cause those frequencies to change. And this can turn out one of two ways again. The good times could end with something going wrong, that life that seems so perfect suddenly takes a turn, money's lost, relationships fail, or some other life event will upset the apple cart. Or it can get better. Things will continue to grow, exciting opportunities and adventures appear in front of you. And life changes in ways beyond your dreams. Now, if it's left to chance, your beliefs and those around you will affect this greatly. If you're surrounded by negative people, then they'll influence you in a bad way. And if you have a general expectation of the worst happening, then guess what? That's what you're going to get. But if you're surrounded by people who support you or have the positive outlook, and this isn't just a conscious thing, it can be outside your awareness, then things will head towards the positive side of growth. The potential energy in the spring and the effects of entropy do not care which way they go, as long as the order and the harmony is disrupted. Now, unfortunately, in today's society, if left to chance, then it's likely to go against you. The negativity expressed by the media, the doom scrolling on social media, the general state of despair and dissatisfaction by the general population will all affect the direction that your shift takes. So your best option is to take charge yourself consciously. Work on the other elements of consciousness too, but the conscious part is where you can act willingly. Now, within the speaking circuits, there's often talk of focusing on big goals, and to me, this is potentially a dangerous game. Reason will struggle to truly harmonize with a goal that seems so far out of reach that it just can't imagine it being there. So your spring will be stretched for long periods, storing that negative energy in ways that you can't use, and this will turn against you. Now, I'm not saying don't have big goals, definitely do. I have massive goals, but make sure you have smaller, more achievable ones. Ones that can be reached easily. And as you reach each one, set a new one. And this will keep the synchronization of the harmonies within the growth range, but also enable you to direct the growth in the way that you want. Entropy will have less power to overthrow your plans, and your entire consciousness can focus on the steps forward. And if you've already achieved everything you want, if you have that perfect life, then don't let it stagnate. Make new goals that are less materialistic and more experiential. Travel, have adventures, experience new things. And this will keep the frequencies in flux enough to prevent that stagnation and to stop any form of destruction taking over. Okay, that's as far as we're going to go on this video. This is an ongoing project that will become part of the Sanomentology Magic and Miracles program. And the ideas and theories form the basis of the processes in Sanomentology therapeutic design. So if you want to know more, then head over to the website www.sanomentology.com. Explore the different options. This video is meant for information, it's not for sale, so I'm not going to go into details of offers or anything else. If you're interested, go have a look. I really hope that this video has given you something to think about and an idea how you can use your emotions to much greater effect. Don't forget, every emotion that we experience is a message guiding our direction forward. Embrace them all and use them all to your best advantage. Take care.